Greetings, fellow readers. This is Rambling Collector here, back with another comic review for all of you today. And we're going to be diving into what is an absolutely massive graphic novel here. A comic compendium, as a matter of fact, of a classic series from the DC Vertigo days. We are going to be talking about Fables by Bill Willingham. I was actually lucky enough to stumble upon this one in one of my local comic stores. Apparently the original customer who bought this compendium didn't show up to purchase it, so I was lucky enough to pick it up for myself, and I am more than happy to say I have finally read this monstrosity of a book. Not to say that it's bad, but this sucker was gargantuan. You're about to find out more about it, and for those of you who are curious about Fables and what exactly it's like, think Once Upon a Time, the TV show, but as a comic book. Let's get started. So to start with, a whopping 1,180 pages. This compendium is a heavy and intensive read with a lot of exposition and plot packed in. So, for one thing, the main premise of this series is that all your modern day fairy tales, such as Snow White, Red Riding Hood, Little Boy Blue, people like Three Little Pigs, the Old King Cole, all the classic nursery rhymes and childhood stories that you know of are all brought in here into a section of New York City which they have squared off and they call Fabletown. It's where all the classic folks here pop up, and let me tell you right now, it is a hodgepodge of a community with various different factions and people who either want to retake their homelands which have been taken from them by whom they call the arch enemy, but is called by the enemy the Emperor. And when you find out who exactly the arch enemy really is, the Emperor of Demise, it is terrifying and kind of whack, if you don't mind me saying. But first of all, my biggest thing that I like about Fables is that it creates a unique environment with well-known fairy tale characters being reimagined in interesting ways, as well as they show these characters being involved in a modern-day environment. You have all these folks who are so used to swords and shields and poisons and things like that, having to adapt to things like modern warfare with guns and classic buildings and apartments and things like that. These people who live in castles and mansions for their entire lives, who've never known anything different, now have to live in these lower-class apartments or, well, yeah, essentially that, and work in, well, modern day stores. They have to keep up the appearances so that way the mundies, or mundanes, aka regular human beings, do not figure out their nature as fables or famous story characters. But if you were to ask me, some of my favorite characters in this series thus far have been Snow White, who is the co-mayor of the entire Fabletown story, up until maybe the second half of the book, I want to say, or at least the final third. There is also Bigby, the big bad wolf, son of the North Wind and a female wolf, which already makes him pretty interesting because the fact is he is a wolf monster in so many different stories, most prominently known as the big bad wolf from the Three Little Pigs, but also the wolf in Red Riding Hood, whom in fact survived getting his stomach cut open and having stones put into it. But more than that, you have Little Boy Blue, as well as Jack. You know, Jack and the Beanstalk. It presents Jack as sort of a guy who will go out to try to cash in on his fame and fortune, trying to find a way to his next big score. Kind of a drifter or con man in a way. Little Boy Blue, though, I did not expect someone who plays a musical instrument to inspire people to be such a hard-ass of a warrior. Like, this guy comes in here with a vorpal sword and a magic cape, and he leads a one-man crusade into the enemy's territory with Pinocchio, of all people, who is a real boy who cannot age. But he goes on a one-man crusade to try to find Red Riding Hood and free her, as well as he even manages to execute the Emperor, whom we come to find out is a wooden doll, a giant wooden sentient puppet. And by God, finding out that, in fact, the real Emperor of Demise, the real arch enemy, is in fact the creator of Pinocchio, Geppetto himself, was such a twist that it blew my mind. But more than that, though, Bigby, I like how he's a hardcore investigator, as well as a man who is constantly suspicious of other people. He's especially right in considering when Red Riding Hood somehow mysteriously returns to Fabletown after escaping from the archenemy with a closed portal, only to come to find out that his suspicions were correct, and that this Red Riding Hood that Fabletown had been seeing was in fact a witch in disguise known as Baba Yaga. But I think I'm rambling on here. Let's keep moving, shall we? More than that, though, let's talk about the art style here. And I can say this much, the artwork for this series was fantastic, ranging from classic storybook illustrations like you see here in the middle, all the way to very clean and very well done here on the far right, to absolutely mystical and amazing, like I'm looking at a moving painting, as you'll see in the far left. I love how diverse the artwork for this series was. It makes me want to read more just to see more of the story intact. And there's so many other twists and turns that left me shaking my head or having to process what it was I just in fact read. Fables is a great series that people should check out, whether it's for a visual artwork or even for an amazing story. Regardless though, let's move on to random thoughts here. So random thoughts here. First of all, I love the concept of fables, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I've just got to say it again. It's amazing how it adapts all these modern-day fairy tales, puts them into a scenario where they have to survive in a modern-day city and try to reclaim their homelands from a conqueror who is in fact one of the most simple people you will ever meet. A humble doll maker winds up becoming an emperor, creating an empire by replacing aristocrats or kings who are failing with wooden replicas. And that is how it all starts. That's insane to me. The sheer scope and depth of this series is what amazes me the most. Plus, not to mention, also seeing a unique romance between Snow White and the Big Bad Wolf, something I never thought I would see, but turns out it works. They both bounce off of each other in ways that I never thought of. Hell, even having a litter of pups. That's right, you heard me. A litter. Poor Snow White had to deal with like 48 hours of labor. Oh dear God, I can't imagine the pain. I don't think I want to imagine the pain. But, other than that though, again, Little Boy Blue, managing to make his way through the entirety of the Empire, all the way to the big city to decapitate the Emperor of Demise, whom at this point we find out is a wooden puppet, was crazy. I wasn't expecting to be as hooked in as I was, but good lord, he did it too well. Little Boy Blue is someone you don't mess with, ever. More than that, though, I love how this series actually takes a moment in like the final third of the book, with Snow White trying to appeal to one of the main characters from 1001 Arabian Nights, another form of fairy tale, and telling him stories from their homelands, such as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and how, in fact, she actually murdered the Seven Dwarfs for kidnapping her and possibly violating her. Which, that was a turn I was not expecting, but here's the biggest one. The witch from Hansel and Gretel, a witch that remained unnamed. And they do slip her name in for once or twice, but I completely forgot. But they actually dive into her backstory. And my God, this woman was actually responsible for a lot of the modern fairy tales or fables. She was responsible for Billy Goat's Gruff, Beauty and the Beast, Rapunzel, so many more. She was the one who created those stories, and that, to me, is insane. I was not expecting that kind of a backstory from a woman who was responsible for creating a whole bunch of the modern fairy tales within the Fables series. I was not expecting that at all. And when I read it, my brain actually burst a little bit thinking about that. Fables is a hot pot of creativity that people need to read more of, please. Now I'm actually tempted to watch Once Upon a Time to see if it compares to Fables and see how it runs? I'm very curious now. Or even just to read more of this series in general. I want to know how it all ends. And honestly, making it where the enemy that they are facing is a literal army of wooden dummies is insane. And how Geppetto actually convinced the Blue Fairy to work with him, only to then kidnap her to use her magic to give them all sentience, is wow. I wasn't expecting Fables to get so dark. Like, Fables does not shy away from telling you that this series is a series for adults, because it is part of the Vertigo line. There's a lot of lovemaking, there's a lot of adult language, there is a lot of brutal violence that you will see throughout. But is it worth it though? Absolutely. Anyways, you probably already know what I'm going to give this series, but let's go ahead and get to the final score. So overall, I have to give Fables Compendium 1 a solid 10 out of 10. It kept me hooked from start to finish. It made me intrigued to want to learn more about these characters and see how they interact in this world. And quite frankly, it makes for an amazing read. You can get this series either as the individual issues themselves, or you can get them in the compendiums like I'm about to do. I will say, the compendiums would make for a great piece on the shelf. But regardless though, I hope you all enjoyed this new comic review, and I promise you, we will have another one in store here before the end of the month. I promise you that much. More than that, guys, though, thank you once again for listening to this crazy man's ramblings. I hope at least some of what I've said has inspired you to pick up this book for yourselves, and more importantly, to give this series a chance. Or if you're a longtime fan, maybe just seeing me rant about it and finally giving it the attention it deserves has put a smile on your face. More than that, though, you guys, if you like what I do here, please feel free to leave a like for this video, comment your thoughts on the review down below, or subscribe if you're interested for more of my crazy book ramblings. You never know. I might just review a book that you might find interesting, or that you've heard about, and you never know. I might help to expand your reading collection or TBR. But regardless of you guys, once again, thank you so much for listening. If you want to check out more of the comic reviews that I've done, I will leave a link to that playlist up above. Or if you're curious to see some of the books that I've reviewed in the past, I will leave a link to that playlist above me as well. Once again, you guys, thank you so much for listening. This is Rambling Collector, signing off for now. Have a great day, fellow readers.